My name is Jennifer Gill, and I'm the Director of Global Product Marketing at Zerto, and we have a really exciting webinar for you today on Zerto and hurricane preparedness. So our agenda, I'm going to introduce our speakers in just a minute. We have speakers across industries and with the Red Cross. We'll have a panelist discussion, so we have our questions, and we also want to take your questions. So in the panel that came up for me on the right-hand side of my screen, you'll see there's a questions tab. Open that up, type in the question, and we will try to get to all of those before the end of the webinar. And then we'll get into a brief overview of Zerto virtual replication, and then that will just about cover it. So with us today we have Mark Fernandez, who's the IT Manager at the Red Cross. Mark has over 19 years of experience with IT and over 25 years of experience in nonprofit. And he'll talk about all the facets of preparedness during a hurricane. And he has kind of a different perspective because Mark comes in when there's disaster. He doesn't try to get things out when there's a disaster. So Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We also have Fidel DeFort, who's the ICT Manager at the City of Cape Coral. And the city's infrastructure supports all the critical operations such as utilities, police, and fire. And they all rely on the availability of the data center, so like 911 operations. And he'll talk about the importance of automation during disaster. So Fidel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jen. And
last but not least, we have Daryl Mirage, who is the Vice President of Global Technology Solutions at GA Telesis. So located in Florida, along with Fidel, they are certainly familiar with natural disasters. And he'll provide insights on their organization and how they keep ready for hurricane season. Daryl's organization provides support to airlines in their airplanes, so they try to keep airplanes in the air for the airlines. Thanks so much, Daryl.
Thank you, Jen.
So this slide is just kind of top concerns, so level set around the discussion points that we're going to talk about today. So first, people. So although IT infrastructure is important, and your businesses, I'm sure, are also very important, especially to senior management, but really people are the most important thing. So how do we keep everyone safe, and how do we communicate effectively with everyone? And then what's the time to impact? So how long do we have to prepare? So looking at, is your data center ready? Do you have a disaster recovery plan? And how can you execute that plan with as little impact to the end user? And then post-impact. So the storm or a natural disaster has moved through the area. So now what's your recovery process? How do you fail back? How long can you run at your DR site should you not be able to fail back? So those are the kinds of questions that we'll tackle today. So keeping people safe, what do you need to do? What's your company communication plan? And what kind of public notifications are needed? So Fidel, you had talked about communicating not just with your own internal organization, but also with the public. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Hi, Fidel DeFort, City of Cape Coral. Here at the city, we have around 65,000 residents, and originally we've used Code Red, and a few years ago we switched to Everbridge. However, we've in recent years we've coordinated with police and fire, and we've recently adopted an app such that we can inform our public, of course, for those who have smartphones and so forth, so that we can notify them when there are issues, changes, criminal and non-criminal, disaster, non-disaster. And this app, it's licensed to different departments. Additionally, in our Emergency Operations Center, we have communications in place such that we can, within a half an hour notice, switch our 911 and our communication center and go into emergency mode, take calls, put recordings on. We've leveraged an 800 number with Florida, the state of Florida, so that we can also notify employees whether they can come in, stay home. So we manage both the public and the employees throughout disasters or any non-disaster but emergency situation, fires, critical, criminal, missing persons, and so forth.
Great, thanks so much. And then Mark, you kind of have similar communication structure around Fidel because you're also maybe dealing with internal Red Cross employees, but also with the public.
Yes, thank you. We do have that. We lean towards the notifications, especially from the Weather Channel, the police, and the fire, and we take that and in turn turn it around, and we communicate that to our staff and as well as out to the public. And along that, we will also then make sure we provide out some of the preparedness items that the Red Cross we have been distributing for a long time. And a lot of this preparedness is things about what they need to do, where they need to go to stay safe, when a hurricane comes, what they need to make sure they pack. So these are all checklists that we have in place that will help people be more prepared as they go to shelters or safe havens that is directed by the public safety officials. So that's what we would use.
Great. And then Daryl, so you have a little bit of a different scenario, which I think may be very applicable to our attendees today on the webinar, because you want to keep your employees safe, but you are also servicing another business, so you have to make sure you communicate with the airlines effectively as well. So can you talk a little bit about what those processes look like?
Sure. So ours is actually very simple in terms of communication. We've set up a aircraft on ground line, which our service is called AOG, and that is primarily our main contact. If there is an emergency happening, we direct everything to our AOG line, and that AOG line can be picked up in 4 different countries. So basically, to the end user, there is absolutely no downtime. There is absolutely nothing that affects them. Business as usual. They call our AOG line. What we do just to communicate if there is a natural disaster happening, we do send out to our customers that we're not affected by it. If there is a problem with shipping and everything else, we will work on those things, but nothing changes for the end customer. They basically are able to still call our AOG line, which can be picked up in 4 different countries, and it's business as usual for our customers. So basically, having our customer not change anything that they do is what we try to pride ourselves on.
Great. Okay. So now that we have all the people safe, now we can get into more of the nitty-gritty of the disaster recovery plan around the data center. And then, Daryl, I'm sorry to come back to you, but you're first in my notes that I took when we did our practice. So you had mentioned first thing you need to do is really look at, okay, so what's mission critical? What is going to impact the business? What do I need to have up and running? So what's the process that you have within GA Telesis, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So this first part of it is once you've kind of gotten on your communication plan, which we just went through it, and you kind of are aware of who are the people that you need to let know, then you internalize. And the first thing you need to figure out is what are your primary systems? What are your key business systems? Where is your disaster recovery site? What hardware has to be prepped? Has it been checked recently? Because a lot of time people have disaster and co-location sites that are, they don't get the attention that they deserve. So have you checked it to make sure that there's no hardware problems? Figuring out how much downtime you can afford if you actually have to execute your disaster recovery time, and then basically how much time does it actually take for that disaster recovery time, and does it fall within the time limit that you have for being down? To expand on any one of those. So in a regular business situation, you have a lot of servers that service a lot of different needs. It does not make every single one of them mission critical. Mission critical for us is basically what key systems do I need to have up and running so that my business can continue running. In 9 out of 10 situations, it's going to be your ERP system. It's definitely going to be your mail system and your phone system, right? So you have open lines of communication through phone and email, and then you have your ERP system, which is where most of the work is going to be done to do whatever in whatever business that you're doing. So once you've identified those key business systems, then you can figure out how long how long can those be offline before people start noticing, and then that gives you your first indication of how long your disaster recovery time should take.
Okay, great. And Fidel, you talked about a similar process as well when looking through your data center, working with your BIAs, so your kind of business infrastructure owners, and figuring out, okay, what's important, what's the criteria to be considered mission critical. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yes. So with our BIAs, well, first we adopted as a process, we followed the COVID. Now it's COVID 5 is out, but we still we still follow the process of COVID 4. And what we did with that, COVID and ITIL, we integrated both of those into our policies and procedures. We followed through with business impact analysis. We looked at business function, the business process, the critical business function, the process, personnel, impact, application, recovery point objective, and recovery time objective. And we took the results of all that information, which we did individually with departments. That was a difficult time because we had to encourage the departments that they needed to fill that out. That was not an IT function. With that data, it allowed us to prioritize the processes. Obviously, as a city, and because police and fire, public safety, comes under our portal, we separated life safety. So this is taking out the life safety aspect and looking at the environment, the city data, and the utilities. And we at first started with the top 5. Darryl mentioned ERP, that was the top one for us. We then conducted audits on those processes, and those audits looked at our disaster recovery scenarios, what departments are doing, are they following the same principles and processes that we outlined. And 3 years ago, as a matter of fact, we had failed one of those audits miserably, and it was because of one of the processes for our ERP system. And when we looked around and we tried to identify, well, how can we stay within our recovery point objective, our RPOs and our RTOs as identified in the business impact analysis, that's how we came across Zerto actually. So it's coincidental, as Darryl mentioned, our ERP system was the first system that we put on Zerto. And in December of 2013, we actually conducted a live test on a Thursday with audit mid-afternoon after we did our pre-test, and we pulled the plug on the ERP system, watched it fail over to the mirror side, and Zerto, within 30 minutes, we picked back up right where we left off, and we ran the system for the next 24 hours to ensure all users can log on to the system, which actually is not a live, a true representation, because in a DR you have a subset of users that will actually be live. A lot of people will be offline. But we ran the entire city of the ERP system on the mirrored system, and then mid-afternoon on the following day, the Friday, we failed back. That took 20 minutes, and we brought everything back online on the production system, the original production system. And in the 2 years since, we moved payroll. We're in the midst of moving 2 other systems as identified from the business impact analysis. So we use that, and that fit into our business continuity plan. And altogether, that falls under the umbrella of the fire department, who manages the continuity of operations plan, the COOP, which is the overall package for the whole city. And that's how we go through our disaster checklist. Those systems and processes I just mentioned hit all these bullets. It allowed us to pinpoint the areas that we need to focus on: the downtime, the hardware, the execution of our GR plans. And that's the plan that we continue to work against. We do these analysis annually, and we are audited annually also to stay by external auditors to stay updated and to make sure all our mitigation and our tests are in accordance with the plan.
Great. And Mark, when we had talked to you about like how do you prepare for the disaster, you mentioned in particular like memorandum of understandings and also SLAs, kind of the agreed upon plan between the IT team and the business team. So can you talk about your experience with that?
Sure. We have site servers, as well as we have a centralized main server which is located in the middle of the country. So it helps us in the hurricane season that our main data center for the Red Cross is located in the middle of the country, and we have an SLA, which is a service level agreement, that we have set up with them as to what their plans are if there was an outage or if there was a failure. So by that, we are able to then figure out how many hours we are on our own, so to speak, and what we need to do to have our business continue on. And so these agreements spell everything out, and we also make sure that during before a major disaster like a hurricane and stuff like that that we can prepare for, we have tests that we run on an annual basis that says, okay, if we fail, what is our backup plan? Let's go through the process. How do we deal with this? Where is the backup data kept? So for local sites, we have backing up to our cloud systems that allow us to then say, okay, we are offline. We have to move our equipment because there is an issue with the site to a new location. We bring it back online. The data will sync back, and users are back online. The Red Cross also does help businesses prepare for various activities and make sure that they are ready for any form of disaster. And we use a website the business can go to. It's the readyrating.org website, and people can take tests there for their businesses, figure out whether they are ready as a business and what they need to think about, and provide guidance as to how they do their disaster recovery from there. What is their downtime? How do users work? What if they are no longer able to come into an office? You know, makes you think through the whole process of what you need to do. And so those are some of the things that we have to worry about. The other thing is we are big on connectivity out to the environment and to the world, because we need to be able to ramp up during a disaster. Most companies are thinking of how they can fail over and what their downtime is. We are on the other end of it, and we are actually ramping up to make sure we are in constant communication with businesses out there, with companies, with city officials, and making sure that we are able to get information in as well as pass information out so we can coordinate the next phase, which is the recovery phase. So that's what we have to do on our side of our data recovery and data centers.
Yeah, and Mark, you hit on this a little bit already, but you mentioned, like, what about end users? So if an end user has been, in the middle of with a company and they've never experienced a disaster with a company, maybe they've never worked from home and they haven't had to VPN. So, how does this change what they do, and what do you do to minimize end user frustration?
Yeah, that is one of the biggest things. Is end user frustration is 90% of the obstacles you have to worry with, because that's where the masses of tickets and requests will come in, and frustration will be for the lag time. The best bet we have always done is that before we kick off a disaster, so to speak, we have this preparedness thing, and we make sure we communicate out to all our users. That's a one-sheet process of how do they log in with their laptops to VPN. Most people who come into their offices on a daily basis don't have to log into a VPN process. So what we do is we physically take their machine offline and saying, run through the steps, here they are, A, B, C, walk through them with it, give them picture shots and a job aid, and have them feel comfortable prior to leaving the office already anxious about the oncoming disaster that they have to prepare for their family. So by giving them this cheat sheet, you are actually making them a little bit more, have a safety net that they can rely on, and they will feel a little bit more comfortable walking away with that and their workstation, knowing that they can still try to get online. And then if all else fails, what is the alternate communication method for them to get hold of IT, for assistance, and so forth. So that is our biggest thing that we struggle with a lot. And we need to make sure we are prepared to communicate that out. And we do have job aids that we do that on a constant basis for users.
Great. And Daryl, you had mentioned your business is kind of 24/7, so most do have worked from home and know how to log in and things like that. What other best practices or resources do you provide to your end users just to make things a little easier?
Well, so going on the whole theme of everything, right? So when you're talking about end user experience and how do you minimize frustration, which is, if you don't, in IT, the entire company is serving everybody else, and you're serving everybody within your organization. So how do you best serve your customer? So when we're talking about end user experience here at GA Telesis, basically what we do is, we try to provide as little change as possible, because a lot of people are resistant to change. Being in IT, you're like, yeah, bring it on. Let me see the new version of the program, and you introduce that to a user, and the user gets really confused. So because we're a 24/7 operation, we have published apps in a program called 2X, which is similar to Citrix and apps or anything else like that. So how have we mitigated this risk? Basically, if an end user is working from home and they're working on these published apps, when I do my disaster recovery, how do I communicate as little to them as possible about changes rather than communicating downtime? So here's how the process works for us. When we fail over, and thankfully we haven't had to fail over recently for a hurricane, but that might change. So when we fail over to the disaster recovery side, we already know how much time that's going to take. So Zerto is very good at that, and Zerto can tell us exactly how long it's going to take, and we can practice it. Even if we don't know, we can practice that ahead of time. So we know that if we fail over our primary ERP system, it's going to take Zerto and all the processes that it has to go through about 30 minutes to fail over everything. And we're talking about all of our huge databases and everything. So we get failed over to the DR side, and Zerto has done its work. Now how do we communicate to the end user that now you're going to be logging into the DR site rather than our primary location? The answer is we don't. So we can go in and make all of our DNS changes and everything and repoint all of our services, because these are published services through that end user interface that they're using. We republish all of our settings, even all of our Oracle settings, and we point it to our disaster recovery side. And the only communication that goes out to an end user after it's tested and it's up and it's running is, hey, you can go back and you can log in now. And they can log in from any continent, anywhere in the world, no problems. They don't have to change a setting on their computer, and they have no idea what just happened in the last 30 minutes.
Awesome. That's a great end user experience.
We strive for the best.
So post-event, so what's next? So Fidel, you talked about, with your business impact analysis, kind of fail back. You take the lead from that analysis and kind of what are the priorities when you're moving back. So once you failed over and you're working on recovering from the disaster, how does that work for you and your team?
Right. And but first I'd like to say, those two scenarios that Daryl and Mark just mentioned, very informative. I took some notes when they were speaking. I just wanted to just add on to the back of that at the city here with the end user experience on that prior slide.
Sure.
If you just want to touch back. For those who may be from government on this WebEx, one of the things that we did here as a city that helps us is we formed a consortium several years ago with other agencies in our area. And what that did is everything from what we buy, the staffing that we have, we share, we pool our resources and we share information about that so that if a disaster occur, I mean, you may have staff, I may have staff on vacation. That happened when I was in New York during 911. We had some, that incident, when that incident happened in September 2001, there was a huge show in Atlanta, and we had a lot of IT admins at that show, and they got stuck in Atlanta. So we took a page from that, and we cross-train, and we create, as Mark mentioned, MOUs with agencies. And we used to meet once a month. That's moved on to like once every couple of months. But we pool our resources, and as a result of that pool, our shared pool also put us all together in the same hot site, 160 miles from where we are up in Gainesville, Florida. And any one of those leads in the other agencies can jump in if myself or our staff is unavailable and orchestrate changes and or assist. So for our end users, on the back end, we have adopted that shared approach, and we did the same with our carriers, where we have multiple carriers for our BYOD, our mobile devices. We keep devices on hand as an emergency. From June to November is when we're on alert for hurricanes. So in May, we start running through our checklist and keeping a pool of devices to hand out. We also keep a list of people that may have retired that have knowledge, because when a disaster hits you, people may be hurt, employees may be hurt, staff and so forth. Support personnel may be unavailable. So we also have a list of a go-to list of people that have retired or but still in the area that can come in at a moment's notice and using Citrix and other remote mechanisms to do that. So just wanted to add that on that slide.
That was great. How do the retired people feel about coming into work?
Okay,
they
get excited. They look forward to those, those events. Yeah. So on the post-event, for us as a city, we back off and let life safety go in. So we take a breather. IT on the back end, we manage our users remotely, while the essential and emergency services go in and take care of the infrastructure. On the technology side, we have and we are currently still making some changes. We moved from tape to disk, so that our first mechanism, we got the Zerto mechanism in place, and then we have the non-critical applications, or if there is an issue, whatever it may be, and we have to go to backup, we go to disk backup. That's our secondary. Our tertiary, we have leveraged some cloud mechanisms where we store non-confidential data in an encrypted cloud box and so forth that users have access to. So and that will help us in terms of a data recovery mechanism. So we sort of tier our fail back. The ERP, payroll, those are key systems that come on. The purchasing systems, which is part of ERP, those come online. But we back that up with a pre-event checklist. What we do is to not put too much on stress on the failback. We picked out some areas looking at past disasters where there were issues in processes. So one major thing was in infrastructure as a city. You bring contractors come in, roadways, bridges. How do we get these people paid, and how do we accomplish those tasks? So we moved as many processes as we can to an offline manual process. So with a phone call, while IT on the back end is negotiating what comes back online, public works, utilities, and finance go through a manual process that starts with a phone call and kicks off the contractors coming in to get the infrastructure up. By the time the ERP systems comes online, those manual processes which were documented pre-event are now synced into the system. So an example of that is we identify many of our common vendors that we would use annually, and we stage in May of each year, just before hurricane season, we will put into the system a $1 purchase order, and that goes into the system, and a hard copy goes out to the vendors, state contract holders, and so forth, so that when they're called post-event, while IT starts bringing systems online, we don't hold up the work that needs to be done to get the infrastructure and things moving within the city. Those $1 POs kick in, and the work done is logged, communicated. We have the laptops with key area out there, key personnel that have disaster applications that are specifically written for infrastructure and recovery, so that the work that's being done is logged. By the time our systems come online, procurement and finance, payroll, they start updating that information from those devices and from those applications into the ERP system, so people get paid, things get checked. For us as a city, a big thing is FEMA. FEMA will only jump in and fund those items that were properly documented. So we have to be very detailed about all the work that's done and all the steps that were taken, so that after the fact we can present to FEMA, fill out the reports, and all whatever is required to get the assistance on that end. And above all of that, we use, in communicating any changes with our users, we use the messaging system I mentioned earlier, our 800 number that only employees can call in. Of course, with in the last few years, the mobile and the smartphone has taken off. So today, we also have messaging systems that would support that 800 number, but that's our primary thing, where we leave set messages. Someone calls in every day, leaves a recording, employees, users call in and listen to the recording and get directions from that. And that's how we handle our post-event.
Okay, great. And then, Mark, you kind of mentioned that failback for you is kind of very different, because when you come into the environment, you're really bringing all your own stuff with you, because you guys need to be up and running no matter what.
Yes, that's correct. As I earlier said, that when a disaster starts, we are actually ramping up. So what we do is we bring in equipment into a site that has generator capabilities and be able to withstand whatever disaster that we are in, especially if it's a hurricane. We are out of the slush zone, we are out of the flood zone, there is power to the building. We know that one of the issues is utility-wise, we are going to lose most probably our internet connection due to fiber being cut, down power lines, and so forth. So equipment does go down for the general infrastructure. So what we do is we bring in our own equipment. Since 9/11, which is one of the jobs that I also was at, we did set up a system in place where we do not rely on external support. We create our own bubble world where we feed internet through our corporate office that's bounced off in DC through a satellite. And so we bring in this type of equipment, hook it up, and we have and able to run a full office on that. And as long as we have power feeding from the generator and ways to keep the generator running, we are fine and ready to go, and we can deploy and work with laptops and desktops at that point. And our cell phones become our communication tools. We do have internet-based phones, so we are using VoIP through our corporate office. So we will have infrastructure in place in a whole devastated environment. It may take a little bit of time, but we will be there, and we are bringing in more and more resources to help support the infrastructure that's down, to communicate that out to public officials, to the community, to help run the shelters that shelters or evacuation sites that people have started heading on to, and then start working on mass feedings and various assistance that is going to be needed after the fact when FEMA starts coming in through the area and start processing what needs to get done. So we are on the flip side of what most businesses are, how they are thinking about getting back on. We already ramped up, and we are on the continuity of business aspect of making sure we don't go down.
Great. So, and Darrow, you had mentioned a little bit about kind of what we do to fail over. We just kind of do that reverse to come back to the recovery site. So maybe you want to contrast that and what it used to look like maybe before Zerto and how it looks now?
Right. So it's very simple, actually, and simplicity is what I think Zerto entails, right? So when we plan on failing back, the very first thing that's on the list is basically doing a site survey. The slide that you have up is actually pretty cool, and you go back to your office and it looks something similar to the slide that's up on the screen, then yeah, you probably don't want to fail back to that primary site. So a lot of things to take into consideration. Is your primary site ready to be failed back to? Are you expecting employees back at your primary site? If it looks anything like after Hurricane Sandy, which is the photo that you have up there, chances are you're not going to have people showing back up to the office, right? So you continue to work off-site. If your primary environment is ready to be worked on on-site and you've done that physical survey, and your power is not fluctuating or anything like that, then you can start the failover process back out. So how that looks for us is we communicate first to our end user. Hey, we're going to be down for X amount of time. We're going to fail back over, which is the exact same process as failing in the first place. We're going to fail back over to our primary site, which should have been keeping changes of all these replications that happened in the DR site. If for whatever reason it went down, we would make sure that those changes are up to date first via Delta Sync, and then we can fail back over. Once we fail back over and we make those DNS changes, people are now in the office and they continue to work how they used to on a day-to-day basis, and all of our remote users in different countries can continue to work the exact same way they've always been working, and they have no issues to that. In terms of communicating change, the first email goes out, we're ready to fail back, and we expect about 30 to 40 minutes of downtime. When that's completed, the second email goes out and phone calls to key individuals, letting them know, especially our aircraft on ground team, letting them know that they're first in the system, go for it.
Great. Okay, and then before we get into the product stuff, Fidel, a question came in for you, and someone was wondering about when you're leveraging your retired staff, how do you get equipment to them so that they can be effective?
Right, yeah, I just saw the question and I posted an answer, but what I wrote in there is we use the Emergency Operations Center as a staging point. So the assumption, first is always life safety. We, not just for the retired staff, but for any user that are in the area, because obviously we do encourage people that can, get out of the area unless you're essential to do so. So on the first we wait for the go-ahead, the clearance from police and fire. For us, the biggest thing for us are trees and light poles and so on. Once that's done, because we pre-staged equipment into the Emergency Operations Center, that's our staging point for equipment and accessories. However, we do have a subset of users, and we use Public Works and the Building Division to identify a few key individuals, retired or just those that live in the area that have done some consulting work with the city. Some of these we have in the past dropped off prior to an event. So the hurricane is good because we have that window to operate in. A few years ago, we had a couple of tornadoes. They weren't so bad, but those are the events that can catch us off guard. But on the hurricane side, we do pass these off to individuals together with, we have air cards from carriers, multiple carriers. We keep either, the two common ones we use are Sprint and Verizon, just so that we can offset in case one gets hit. And then we deliver these in advance, and we ensure that both those identified individuals or actual users, some of them may even be outside the boundary so that they can not be affected, and we make sure that they're available. So that's how we stage all that equipment. And then once the Emergency Operations Center is open for additional pickup as a delivery point, inside of there we IT have a set of tough books and mobile devices and desktops and so on, together with the county on the mainland, because where we are, Cape Coral is off the mainland. So we'll keep a subset in our Fort Myers location already set up as a working room for those who need to be in an office-like environment.
Great. So if anyone has any other questions, as I mentioned, use the questions tab, type them in, and we'll be sure to read them out loud so everyone can hear it and get you a good answer. So since we have about a little under 15 minutes. So I'm going to go pretty quickly through the product slides, but I just really wanted to make sure you heard from Mark, Fidel, and Daryl, because I know they have the information that you're kind of more interested in. So we're going to move kind of quickly through the product slides. So with Zerto Virtual Replication and moving to our cloud continuity platform vision, you really get several use cases satisfied. So private clouds, so you can use replicate from any storage to any storage. You support multiple hypervisors. You can support any distance. We have customers replicating from Texas to Dubai, from the Boston area to London. We can support the hybrid cloud, so public, private, kind of, using AWS, for example, for DR or for test dev, and then using your own environment for, production applications and things like that. Of course, we support drives to AWS, and then the future-proofing aspect. So since we support VMware, Hyper-V, and public cloud with Amazon, and we're just going to be adding to that. So you can kind of add whatever you want to your environment with very little risk, because Zerto will still be able to encapsulate that application and move it to wherever you need it to be. So Zerto is virtual aware, and what I mean by that is we replicate VMs and VM decays. We don't care about LUNs or the underlying storage. So you can have like EMC in your production site and Dell or NetApp or something else on your target site. Enterprise class BCDR, so you heard Fidel mention the aggressive RPOs and RTOs. So RPOs of seconds, RTOs of minutes, that's the level of service we're looking to deliver. It's software only and installs seamlessly into your existing infrastructure. When you look at how you've very carefully configured your existing applications, and then someone will come in for your BCDR solution and change everything around, you don't need to do that with Zerto, so that's good. And then storage and hypervisor agnostic, which we already hit on. Okay, so we're going to go over a private cloud architecture fairly quickly. So you can see we have a Zerto Virtual Manager, one for each site. Oh, and I just want to add, this is kind of a simple overview because here we have 2 sites, and Zerto can support multiple sites. So if you have 3, 5, 10, 12 sites, and we have several customers, many, many customers actually, that are replicating among 3 or more sites. So the Zerto Virtual Manager is just a plugin, either vCenter or SCVMM, depending on if you're running VMware or Microsoft. On each host is the Zerto Virtual Replication Appliance. That's 1 per host only. You don't need to put 1 per VM. And that's what's going to enable the seamless scalability that I discussed. And that's what kind of manages the replication among all the VMs within the host. And then the journal provides continuous data protection. So that's 1 hour up to 14 days of historical information. So if you wanted other replication tools, you only have the last point to recovery to, and if the last point is corrupted, then you're kind of in trouble and you have to go to backup. With Zerto in the journal, that's not an issue because you have 14 days worth of recovery points available to you. This also has been used by many of our customers of a different use case, and that's to recover from a logical failure. So you get someone who's maybe a little bit dangerous in terms of their IT knowledge. They delete a file or a mailbox or do something else, and it corrupts an entire database. With Zerto, you can roll it back prior to that person's actions and restore the database, and now you've completely undone everything that they did. And I see here bandwidth requirements. So 5 megabits per second is the minimum. So, and someone's asking if it work over a private VPN. Within a, if you're replicating from Zerto to a managed service provider, I believe the answer is yes. But if you, I will follow up on that. Okay, the continuous block level replication delivers RPOs of seconds. There are no snapshots used. Snapshots can put quite a significant impact on the application, so we don't use those. Storage agnostic, as I mentioned, so you can use Pure, IBM, NetApp, anyone that you would like. And then the cross-hypervisor replication. So great use cases. You probably already own Hyper-V licenses in your environment just because of the way that Microsoft packages their software. So why not make use of that? So instead of having VMware and VMware at your DR site, measure the impact. Gee, if we were to run this application on Hyper-V for 3 to 5 days, what would that look like for our business? If it's not terrible, you might want to think about doing that to save on licensing costs. So the unit of replication for us is something called a virtual protection group. So that's a group of VMs that make up an application, because typically most applications aren't just one VM. You have a couple database VMs, maybe a couple of application VMs, and then maybe one VM as the web portal to give someone access from anywhere. So you can create a group within Zerto, and it knows, okay, no matter where these VMs are, I need to keep them consistent so that I can recover should something happen. So this ensures right order fidelity and consistency across the VMs. This also enables you to use things like vMotion and storage vMotion and move VMs around, because Zerto knows no matter where they move, they're still part of this group, so you can move it to another host if you like. And you're also able to pre-seed at this level. So what that means is, instead of doing your initial sync, because some of these VMs, especially database VMs, I'm sure all of you know, they can get to be pretty large, like 5 or 10 terabytes. So to do an initial sync over your WAN, that can be challenging. So what you can do is maybe use last night's backup, start with that initial sync, point Zerto to the target site, and now you're just doing 1 day's worth of changes. Kind of get you up to speed a little faster. So the journal I mentioned delivers the continuous data protection, and you can see here in the UI, it's really every couple of seconds. So there's like a 10-second gap, a 5-second gap. The largest one I see is like 30 seconds. So it's every time a change is made that I/O is captured and then sent across to the target site. So this also enables you to do things like you can put in markers. So if you happen to run a disaster recovery test today and you want to say, ooh, this is a good checkpoint for us to fail back to today should something happen, now you'll have that stored. So a question that I get asked on webinars many, many times with our customers, and I'll ask Fidel and Daryl to comment on this in a second, is it really just a few clicks to fail over? Because I'm sure if all of you think of your current failover process, you have something that one of our customers has affectionately called the hit by the bus book. He used to have a 300-page disaster recovery plan, which was a total nightmare. So once you've set up your virtual protection groups, you can do other things you can set up in the virtual protection group as if you need to re-IP, so have different IP addresses on the target site, and then boot order, database servers first, then the app VMs, and then the web VMs. So you can configure all that together. So that's all set up ahead of time. So when you want to fail over, you come to the main interface of Zerto, and you'll see there's a red arrow there. When I click, this is a live failover, everything turns to red across the bottom to say, okay, if you're going to do a production failover, is this what you really want to do? So you click the button and say yes. You can select all your virtual protection groups or just one. So here you can see there's a CRM application, there's SQL Server. Do you want to fail over everything or just one? So you select what you want and click next. Then your execution parameters. So you can see there's a commit policy that says auto commit. So with other solutions, once you fail over, they immediately start shutting down production and fail over. And if the failover doesn't take for whatever reason, maybe there was an issue with the networking or something happened at the target site that you weren't aware of, and then you're down in production and you're down on DR. With Zerto, you can say, you know what? I want you to fail over, but don't commit it, aka don't shut down production for 30 minutes. So you can put safeguards in there like that so you don't end up stuck. And then start failover. And that's the whole thing. So Fidel, why don't we start with you? What's your experience with maybe test failover or a real failover if you've done one?
Yes, so when we did, so first with that real failover, the one I mentioned in December, where we did it with the auditor, December 2013, our ERP system. We set up our servers in the ERP system in the groups so that they have the boot order. And at that time, our production was on a new set of servers. When I say new, 3-year-old servers, so they they were benchmarked and at a particular level of efficiency. And with Zerto, since this solution came in and we didn't have much funding, what we did was, which actually turned out good, and I mean, for some of you guys may be in the same boat, we took an old 10-year-old IBM X series system, made sure it had enough disk and memory, and we added that on as our destination on the DR side of Zerto. We did what Jan mentioned. We pre-staged it, so it was we brought it up to spec within the same site, then moved it into the Emergency Operations Center. And when we clicked and committed and failed everything over, as I said, that first one was 30 minutes, and we let it run we ran the whole city on that system. So the only complaint were the speed, and that was because we specifically did not purchase a system that was the same as what was in production. We had a very old system, so we were quite satisfied that the processes that were running did the job, and we adjusted ourselves for the difference in systems, and same with the failback. So for us, what did that do for us? Well, it allowed us to fulfill our order requirements in having a system with very little funding. We also were able to leverage a test system because this older system went from production down to test, so we already had that sitting in a data center idle. So other than the cost of the Zerto, which was, without calling the other vendor that we have, it was more than 80% less than what it would have cost to go with at that time another same size, same type of application for DR. So, and that's why we picked our ERP systems, because we wanted to do that live switch, testing out what Zerto told us, their boast about the boot order, the staging, doing multiple systems in one group, the whole automation. We wanted to do it all in one test, and we proved it. It worked, and that remains today our most complicated system, the ERP system. Today it's 15 servers, database applications, front ends, and all of that, all in one huge group, and that's the one we have running on Zerto. So, and today we've now moved the destination system to a like system, so it's now matching what we have in production. So looking back on that, the wins from that is that for those of you who need something, don't have much budgeted but need a solution, now the Zerto solution did that, and it leveraged what most of us have in our data centers already, which is some test or development systems just sitting there, something that some asset that is in retirement, is retired, some asset that's there, and get it online as a DR. Once that was done, that's moved now into our alternate sites. Did I answer your questions there, Jan, on that?
Yeah, I think so. And then one thing I forgot to mention, actually looking at my notes from our discussion the other day, and Daryl had mentioned, so within Zerto you get non-disruptive DR testing available to you. So you can execute a disaster recovery test, no impact to production, and replication is still happening. So there's no risk in doing disaster recovery tests. And Daryl, you mentioned that with each DR test you were able to improve around other processes with the non-disruptive testing.
That's correct, because with the non-disruptive testing, we were able to basically figure out what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, and then we blew up our our disaster recovery into a bubble, if you will, and it didn't affect anything else that anybody else was doing. It was its own little bubble, and it stayed in that bubble. If you're big on virtualization, you basically have a segregated network that doesn't interact with your network, so you don't have to worry about two machines coming on with the same name, anything like that. So you push it off into a bubble, and then we tried to figure out, okay, now that this has failed over, what's the next step? So we kind of worked a little bit backwards. We didn't start with an elaborate plan. Pre-Zerto, for anybody else that's thinking about going to Zerto, we had a disaster recovery plan, and our disaster recovery plan worked. It wasn't very hard, but it also required a lot of expertise. With SRM, with any one of these other Oracle-based tools or anything like that, it requires a lot of expertise, right? And you can hear from Fidel's plan how complicated some of these can get. So with Zerto, they challenged us, and they basically, I remember it being a big joke. The guy said the install will take 15 minutes, and then after your first replication, let's set up a test machine. We'll have it replicate, and we'll have an RPO of 5 seconds, which I'm like, what is an RPO? He explained it. I said, okay, cool, let's go for it. This is our first real test. It took literally a couple minutes to come back on, and we continued remoting into that machine, and we were like, all right, this was actually mind-blowing. I can't believe that we just finished our very first test, and that was our, they let us test drive it, and that was the first test drive, and it completed the install in 15 minutes. We completed our first demonstration within the hour, and we were good to go. And the guy said, okay, if you wanted to buy it, you can go ahead and buy it and purchase a license. All you need to do now is change the licensing information, and you have yourself your disaster recovery tool. And we were mind blown for a second. We were like, are you serious? That's it? And we doubted it. So we tested it, and we tested it, and we tested it, and we couldn't find a way to break it, and it just works. It works at a hypervisor level, and it's, again, not agnostic to storage or anything else that you're running, and we love it for what it's worth. We don't have to have expertise in-house. It's clicking buttons and understanding what's being driven by those processes. That's all we need to know.
Great. Thanks for that review, Daryl. So I want to thank everyone for staying on because we are 5 minutes past 2 o'clock, so we're running a little bit behind. So I just I kind of advanced through the slides as we were answering questions, and I just want to let everyone know, thank you so much for attending. Daryl, Fidel, Mark, thank you so much for participating today. I think it was really helpful, and we'll have another webinar next month if you would like to join us. Have a great summer. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.